Well, good morning, friends. So great to see your faces as you're jumping on the call. Welcome to our next Church Planters Collective for the second quarter of 2023. Hope you're doing wonderfully well on this Thursday morning. It's great to see your faces again since we were last together in March, late February rather. For those who are joining, why don't you just in the chat chuck in your name, where you're joining us from, even the name of the church that you're involved with or planting. So great to have you on this call on behalf of Exponential Australia. For those who I haven't had the chance to say g'day to, my name is Charlie Burke. I work with the team here. And this space has been all about really providing opportunity, yes, for best practice in church planting, sharpening what you are doing on the ground as a church planter, whatever mode that may be or context you might be ministering in, but also about networking and connecting people who are doing great things. We know that pioneering takes a certain cost, and it is so great to be able to connect together with other church planters. And we just want to cheer you on and say that you guys are doing an amazing job, and however we can serve and help what you are doing on the ground is really the heartbeat of Exponential Australia. As we do get started today, before we get started rather, Exponential Australia just wants to take a moment to acknowledge the lands upon which we stand or which we gather together digitally and the traditional custodians of the land. For me, I'm joining from Darug land, and we wish to just pay respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be on this call, as well as elders past, present, and emerging, acknowledging that God's Spirit dwells in these lands, and we commit ourselves to working together for reconciliation in these lands. A couple of quick housekeeping matters before we throw to our special guest for the day, Jeff Bennett, and I'll introduce him in just a moment. A couple of quick housekeeping matters. Firstly, we are going to be sending out a survey off the back of our Church Planters Collective today. Really do want to hear from you as church planters. What would be helpful? We want this to be a space that is ultimately helpful to what you are doing on the ground. And so we want to hear from you by way of speakers that you might like to hear from, topics, workshops, focuses that you are experiencing, either challenge or, we would love to be sharpened in. So we're going to be sending out a survey off the back of our time together. If you could fill that in and respond, would just be super helpful, because we want this space ultimately to be helpful to you. Secondly, we also just want to encourage, if at all possible, as church planters, maybe via word of mouth, just to be able to share the Church Planters Collective with other people you may know who are church planting. We recognize that different denominations and movements and networks may have their own version of this space, and we're not trying to detract from that whatsoever. But there is something quite unique in connecting with church planters across the denominational spectrum and actually learning from one another, recognizing that there's so much to learn from other people who are doing different things in different parts of Australia in different ways. And so if you have found this space helpful and would like to invite others to be a part of that, we would just really want to encourage you to be able to do that. Thirdly, off the back of our time today with Jeff Bennett, we are going to have some space for Q&A. And so as Jeff is sharing, and of course, we're going to have breakouts to be able to connect with one another today. But as Jeff is sharing, and you may have questions that come to mind, particularly around some of the different things that he is sharing about, would want to just encourage you to both take note of those. Maybe you want to immediately chuck it in the chat section in order to come back to for later. But we will be having about 10 minutes towards the end of Jeff's time for any questions and answers that may come to mind. Fourthly, and I recognize I've got a short list of things to quickly cover here before we introduce Jeff, is our national conference is coming up in October, Exponential Australia's first ever national conference. Many of you were part of our regional events in March, which were wonderful. I hope they were just a real blessing to you. But our first ever Exponential Australia conference is happening on the Gold Coast in October. And as church planters, we have a special discounted rate for you. Usually, I can't even remember off the top of my head the usual conference fee, but for church planters, that is only $50. And ultimately, that's because we want to allow as many church planters or people who are passionate about planting churches to be there, to be sharpened and refined and called to whatever God might be inviting them into as church planters. And so we're going to be joined by Pete Gregg from 24/7 Prayer, John Tyson from Church of the City in New York. Jossie Chacko will also be present. on behalf of Impart, as well as a wide range of Aussie workshop speakers. And so that is going to be an absolute buffet of church planting. And so we just want to put that on your radar. That is for you as a church planter, as well as your partner or another leader that you might like to invite along. And if you know other church planters who aren't yet part of the Church Planters Collective, why don't you tell them about the Church Planters Collective, and then they get that discount in order to come along to National Conference at a heavily reduced cost. Lastly, I promise this is my last housekeeping matter. We are at the end of our time today going to have a bit of a surprise to be able to offer to church planters who are on this call. We have, found it a real joy as Exponential has started in Australia to be able to invite a wide range of organisations that are passionate about helping the church be most effective in what it's doing. And so I will keep our guest a surprise until the end, but we want to be able to, yet again, another opportunity for church planters to take advantage of. So make sure you don't jump off too quickly at the end of the call. We will be finished by 11:15 as promised, but at around 11 o'clock, we're going to have a special guest join us who's going to be able to share around something that is on offer for you. Well, that's all from me. I hope you've been able to keep up with those list of things. But as advertised, we are joined today by Jeff Bennett. Jeff is the Vice President of Church Multiplication for Stadia Church Planting. And Stadia, I'm sure he'll tell us more about Stadia in just a moment, but Stadia's mission is to help start new churches that thrive, grow, and multiply for the next generation. And their vision is that they would love to see a world where every child has access to a church. Isn't that a beautiful vision, that every child is able to access a church community? And so Stadia is an incredible church planting organization. They are interdenominational. They're working right across the US and right around the globe. I first met Jeff in Orlando this year as part of the global partnership between Exponential and Stadia. And Jeff was also in Australia recently running a whole bunch of church planting training and assessment, particularly for the ACC churches nationally. And so we are so glad that Jeff has been able to join us today. As he is traveling, he is joining us from an airport lounge. But Jeff, thanks so much for being with us. And why don't you take some time to both introduce yourself and Stadia and just what you're beginning to observe in church planting trends around the globe at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. Hey, it is just an honor to be on this call. I love connecting with and learning from church planners. So like all of you, all the windows I'm looking at, like you're my heroes because I know the hard work you're doing and I know how vital and important it is to do it. And if you hear the airport people behind me, my apologies. Hopefully you're hearing me a lot better than that. And maybe I'll talk more than they will. So I also know who the special guest is at the end of this call. So as Charlie said, please hang around. It would be well worth connecting with that special guest. And out in Australia for all the Exponential regionals a couple months ago, 3 months ago, got to work with ACC group and leaders from the different states in Australia. And also spent some time with City to City and just got to fall in love with your country. I promised my wife when I come back, I'll bring her with me. So I tried not to have too much fun without her because, she was a little bit jealous. So, but love your country and just super excited to share with each of you today. I am married, been married for 27 years now, live in Atlanta, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, where my wife and I planted a church in 2004. We passed the baton in 2012 to a teammate of mine and moved to Las Vegas to help with another church plant. You guys are probably familiar, you probably heard of Las Vegas, Nevada. In fact, the Golden Knights, if you keep up with hockey at all in the States, the Las Vegas Golden Knights just won the Stanley Cup. So probably no one else cares about that except me, but I just wanted to celebrate that with somebody. So, helped with a new church in Las Vegas, then started working with Stadia full-time in 2015. I've got two daughters, both college age, 21 and 20. And so we're empty nesting now, at least like 1.0 while they're in college. But as Charlie said, Stadia helps. Here's a really important part for me to say. We help you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation. We don't plant churches, you do, and churches plant churches. And so over the last 20 years, Stadia has just really developed a full portfolio of services that serve folks like you from pre to post launch regardless of what model that looks like. We're a multimodal organization, but services like assessment, training, project management, and we walk with the planters not only before they start the new church, but then 2 to 3 years after the church starts, really to help equip you with the tools that will help you lead for the long haul. I love, there's a quote by boxer Mike Tyson. He says, everybody's got a plan till they get punched in the mouth. And, that's church planting, right? I mean, that comes at some point, whether that's week 2 or month 2 or year 2, like at some point. So we like to walk with planters beginning, because, we want to, again, help you thrive, grow, and ultimately multiply. It's not about just planting one church, right? It's about planting multiple churches. And so that's what Stadia does. And seriously, it's been an honor just to be in Australia. We're doing some things around assessment with ACC and city to city. And I tell you, we're learning as much as they probably are, maybe more. So it's just been an honor to be a part of that process. So Charlie asked me to kind of share a few things just that I'm seeing in church planting. So I'm going to share a few things here, and then we'll have some breakouts. Let me start here, though. This is one of the things I've been talking to my team quite a bit about. And it's the idea, and I'll unpack a little bit. It's the idea that it's going to take all types of church planting models to reach all kinds of people. There's not one model that's better than the other. There's not one that's going to work in every place. Like, it takes all types of models to reach all types of people. But, and this is what I've been talking to my team quite a bit about, mission is greater than model. And what I have kind of seen a trend, at least in the United States, I'm not sure it's true in other places, but what I have seen here is that it is easy to fall in love with a model and just kind of identify yourself with a model. And the reality is mission trumps model. And the fact of the matter is, a model is really a method, to use another word for it. And methods are contextual. They're personal. What is your gifting? What's your wiring? What's your capacity? And so, when you start asking questions about yourself, about the people you're trying to reach, I think then's the time to discuss model. It's like, what's our purpose? Where are we starting this new work? Who are we trying to reach? Who's the one that we're trying to bring to Jesus? Now let's talk about what the model needs to be. And I think I've just seen over the last several years, I feel like, the models gotten a little bit more the center attention. And it's like, no, it's still the mission. And then the mission can determine, the context and all those things around that can determine what's the model that's going to best reach the community and the neighborhood that I'm trying to reach. And that's what we're trying to do. I'll talk about assessment here in another segment, but it's really help folks discern who they are and the context they're going to, and then let that mission determine their model. Now, with that said, here's a trend I'm seeing, and that is a trend towards multi-ethnic, multi-leader, collaborative leadership models, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and multimodal. So what I love is, I love this leaning towards multi-ethnic, multi-leader, but then multimodal. One thing I felt like pre-COVID was that a lot of established churches, if they were multiplying churches, they kind of had one model that they were multiplying. What I've sensed since COVID is that there's room for both and. Like, they can do different kinds of modes out of their established church. They can equip their people to start different types of model churches. And so that is definitely a trend that I'm seeing. We're going to unpack the multi-leader thing here a little bit later. I would say another thing I'm seeing is a trend towards digital first steps. Obviously, when COVID hit, we all went digital. We all learned things we didn't know before. Since COVID's hit, we've tried to get back in the building, get people back in person. What I've seen is that years ago, where people that were new to your church would have checked out your website before visiting your church, now they're visiting online before they come in person. It's almost like they're a third time visitor when they actually step foot in your home or in your building or in a school, wherever it is that you're gathering. And so that online experience really is that first step that a lot of folks take. Couple other things I'm seeing. I'm going to hope this is okay, Charlie. I'm just going to kind of rattle a few here. Just what I'm seeing. I'm seeing volunteerism is down. It seems like volunteer retention is suffering. And again, I would say that's especially true in the States here, but I do think it's a metric that teams need to track and focus on. Then the other thing I would say is that the pendulum, I feel like, has shifted from a focus on what I'll say is wide evangelism, just reaching people, to a focus on deep discipleship. And obviously discipleship's getting a lot of attention today. I would say both of those are missing the mark in a lot of the conversations I'm in. Wide evangelism lacked deeper discipleship. I think we have to just confess that in the church, that we gather people, but we weren't discipling them. But what I'm sensing and seeing today is that deep discipleship has, in a lot of cases, been divorced from evangelism and reaching the one. And I think of discipleship, it's the whole thing. It's reaching the one and growing them into Jesus likeness and then helping them disciple others. And so that's a trend that I'm seeing. And then I would just say one other thing that's closely connected to that. I'm finding the majority of church planners I talk to are not in a relationship with someone who's not following Jesus. And so let me just say this. If you think your church is going to reach those far from God, if you think you're going to be able to speak a language that they understand without actually rubbing shoulders and doing life with those far from God, you're kidding yourself. I mean, you're just never going to lead a church that reaches the one if you personally aren't rubbing shoulders and doing life with those who desperately need Jesus. So let me pause there. That was a lot. I hope that was okay. Charlie, you want me to put some questions in the chat?
Yeah, Anne-Marie's going to do that for us, Jeff.
Okay,
I really appreciate that. I think we could probably even just wrap up our time now, just with the gold that we heard in that first little segment, Jeff. So I just want to thank you for that. There was some seriously amazing, pertinent things that you've said there. For those who have been on these calls before, we like to intersperse great sharing by jumping into breakouts, and particularly both to process what you're hearing, because we know that Zoom fatigue is a real thing, and just hearing lots of stuff on Zoom is hard to process, but also because, like I said at the beginning of our time, the emphasis of these calls is to really connect with other church planters as well, and to just kind of do the journey together. And so you're going to get shot off into a breakout in just a moment for a couple of minutes to both say good day, as well as to kind of respond to the questions they're going to get put in the chat. And then we're going to come back together, and we're going to have another segment from Jeff in just a couple of minutes' time. And so say good day, and we'll see you back very soon. Well, welcome back, friends. I hope you had a great opportunity both to connect with the group that you were placed in, and also to begin to reflect upon what we heard from Jeff in that first segment there. Just as another reminder, we're going to have one more opportunity to connect in breakouts at the end of this little segment. And then at the end of Jeff's third segment that we're going to hear from, we're going to have that opportunity for Q&A. So if there are any questions, that I'm sure there's already some great things that have come up for you as you've been listening to Jeff. But we're going to move now into hearing from Jeff, particularly around the area of assessment and some of the comments that he would make around as we prepare to launch, or it being multimodal, if I can get that out of my mouth.
Yeah.
That's at that stage. Yeah. So thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Anne-Marie, can you enable for me to share my screen? Is that, if you were able to do that? I'm going to share my screen here on this, just so, because of some of the things I'm going to share. So let me talk about assessment. It's kind of what we at Stadia call our discovery process, because it really is a process of discovery of what's God's call for your next season of your life. You know, we've all been called, right? I mean, we've all been called to be witnesses, to be ambassadors. Like, we all share that mission. But when you think about church planting, it's like, what the calling kind of thing is like, okay, what's the specific kingdom assignment God's given me in this next season? And maybe it's to be a visionary point leader for a new work. Maybe it's to be a team member. Maybe it's just be a champion of church planting, someone who sends, someone who prays for, someone who shares resources to help new churches get started. One of the reasons we do assessment, thank you, Anne-Marie, for doing that. I'm going to back up a part, is it's just really this belief is that apart from God's favor, the calling, character, and competence of a church planter are the greatest determining factors in new church effectiveness. I don't want to take away from God's favor. That's most important, right? We need God's blessing on the work we're doing and His working with us. But apart from that, your calling, character, and competence are going to have a lot to do with the effectiveness of a new church. So when we work with folks who are thinking about church planting, we really are helping them answer three questions. One is, am I called to start a new church? And, to talk about calling, are there others in my life who've spoken that into my life, see that in me? And really, we really have, when church planting candidates, like if you were to come to us months ago when you were thinking, or years ago when you were thinking about this, we would have you go through this, what we call an exploration phase. And we would certainly walk with you, but it's really a process for you doing some work of going, am I called? Is this the next season God's calling me to in my life? We'll then move to discernment phase. And this is really where we're going. Am I, and if you're married, your family ready to start a new church? You may be called, you may have all the gifts and aptitudes you need, but is the timing right? Is marriage healthy? Financially, you're in a good place. You're not, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and just feel all those pressures, just things like that in your life. Just, is this a good time? Am I ready to start church? And then third question is that we ask kind of around an event that we do is, what is my skill set? And what's that telling me about my next step in starting a church? So here are, then kind of move beyond that. We look at 4 competencies that we feel like are kind of the non-negotiables for starting a new church when it comes to assessment and having what you need to start a new church effectively. It's four competencies: gospel competence, cultural competence, entrepreneurial competence, and relational competence. And I'll just kind of hit quick definitions here. There's a lot to unpack here, so don't get overwhelmed by that. We could talk for a couple hours, but gospel competence, knowledge, skills, behaviors, attitudes that enable us to live out and communicate the gospel in such a way that speaks to the hopes, fears, and felt needs of the specific communities we're called to. You're rubbing shoulders with lost people. You know the gospel. You know how to speak the gospel. And you know what that looks like when the gospel takes effect in a new community. Let me skip down. Cultural competence is knowledge, skills, behaviors, attitudes that enable us to better understand ourselves and our own culture, as well as equip us to understand and effectively engage people from all other cultures. We're not all the same. Even if we look the same, we make decisions in different ways. We think about things in different ways. Like, there's a wide range of cultures. There's a book, I don't know if you're familiar with, Culture Mapping by Erin Meyer, and she talks about several areas where just we can be different in our cultures, and just having some of that cultural awareness and competence. Entrepreneurial, again, the ability to vision, start, organize, successfully grow a new venture, undertaking risk associated with operating that venture, knowledge, skills to be a catalyst for creating new things. And then relational competence, you get that ability to interact, communicate, collaborate with others effectively. And so those 4 things are typically what we're trying to help new church leaders think through. And it's not like all of them, like, you got to score a 10 in all those. It's just how, once we kind of walk through an assessment, we give them development plans of areas where maybe they can grow and learn and stretch in some of those areas. Because we just have found those are neat. You think about entrepreneurial. I mean, you're starting something new. And so, like, have you ever started something new before? Can you cast a vision, but can you get others on board with you? Because that's what church planting is, right? It's building a team around you. It's getting others on this journey with you. And do you have the grit to keep going? Of those 4, one of the questions we're going to give you in the next breakout is, like, of those competencies, which one would you say you most need to grow in? Because we're all growing in all of them. That's just a part of just being a leader, is continuing to grow in those. let me share one thing though, Charlie, before we hand off kind of to another breakout. I had a leader a while back. I often have leaders like, hey, what's like the one thing you look for in new church leaders? And has anything changed since COVID hit? And actually, my answer is yes. I used to say, outside of the spiritual things we're looking for, their relationship with Christ, God, their, just all the things you want to be really healthy in a new leader, a new church leader. I would have used to have said grit. I don't say that anymore. That's still important. But what I say is one of the most important characteristics is agility. Agility. And what I realized during COVID is like, you can have grit, but if you're not going about it the right way, I mean, you're just hitting your head against the wall, right? It's like, okay, I'm sticking at it. I'm just still not, we're not getting anywhere. And it's just painful. And what I just realized is for some folks, I think when they kind of have an idea of like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. This is what's going to work in this community or this neighborhood. Let's go do it. The reality is things don't always go as planned. In fact, they rarely go as planned when you're a church planter, right? Things tend to go wrong or that not as expected. And I just realized, man, agility and to be able to get in there and when things do go in a way you weren't expecting, to be able to pivot and to figure out another way to make the gospel known in that community, that is huge. That is just huge. And so agility, it's not one of those competencies, but it probably kind of lives in that entrepreneurial competence. So I will pause there.
So good, Jeff. I love that. That's such a good thought. I think traditionally we have often thought as that entrepreneurial, gritty leader, but actually the agility to work out, hey, when is the horse dead and we need to get off the horse and go in another direction. I find
exactly.
That hey, as we said before, we're going to jump into one more round of breakouts to be able to connect around some of what Jeff has shared. And I'd really encourage us as we come back together after breakouts, as we're going to have some Q&A very, very soon, throw your questions in the chat section so we know who's got some questions lined up, because we do want to scratch where the itch is. And so we're going to jump back into Zoom breakouts right now, and we'll see you in about 6 or 7 minutes' time. All right, everybody, welcome back. I hope the riveting conversations continued. We are back for our third installment from Jeff, and in this moment together, he's going to be particularly focusing on teams and some of the challenges that we face both in teams, but also in the early stages of planting. Just a reminder, like I said before, please from now begin to throw any questions you may have in the chat. Would love to be able to answer those in about 5 to 7 minutes time. We're gonna begin to answer those questions. So Jeff, back over to you. Thanks so much.
Right. Thank you, Charlie. So yeah, thinking about planting in teams and challenges. One of the things I said in trends is I'm seeing more of just planting in teams, which I think is really healthy. I think there's just this trend towards collaborative leadership models. I also tend to think that Gen Z is going to make that the norm. I think one challenge with teams, at least in the US that I've sensed, is the generational barrier with collaborative leadership. I have found that older generations kind of lack the imagination for it and don't tend to see it as feasible, which in the States has created funding and other barriers for team church planners, collaborative leadership models. And so I think Gen Z and younger, I think they're going to make collaborative leadership a lot more of the norm. I think another challenge with planting in teams is collaborating with the right leader or leaders. One of the things I sometimes watch church planners do is they'll join up with another church planner, or they're building their team, and they'll put people on their team that are wired and gifted in the same way they are. And that is not always extremely helpful. Far better to build a team that complements you in that new church start. So like if you're a great visionary, man, if you're going to do a collaborative leadership model, find a detail person, because that's not going to be where you want to be doing your thing, right? That's not where your best efforts are spent. If you're a detail person, go find the visionary. If you're good on a stage or casting vision, but not great with people, go find somebody and build great teams around you. Like having complementary people around you that you go, okay, here's what I'm good at. Let me find people who do things well that I don't do well. I think it's really important. Now, thinking about collaborative leadership models, planting in teams, Brene Brown says clear is kind. And I think incredibly important is great clarity when you're planting in teams. Clarity among each person's role, what they own, what's expected of them, what decisions they're responsible for. Like the more clear you can be with your team, the better your team is going to function with each other. When there's a lack of clarity, there's going to be a lot of pain as a team. And it's going to be hard to get a lot of momentum and traction in the church planting space. I think also, the reality is when you think about team, I think sometimes it's easy to think about paid team members, but the reality is you're going to be developing volunteers to be a part of your team in that team collaborative model. And so, because a lot just don't have the resources to just hire people around them. But it's also, even if you did, it's vital to build and develop a team from within. And so that's going to be an important part. All right. One other thing I would say before we kind of go to Q&A is another challenge when it comes to planting in teams is you. Okay. Let me just let that sit there for a second. All right. It's you. And I would just say this. The most difficult person you will ever lead is yourself. And there's lots of reasons for that. Part of it's because you're a mixture of strengths and gifts and abilities and insecurities and wounds and inconsistencies and addictions. Or maybe that's just me. Maybe that's not you. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm the problem. But I would just say, seriously, the most difficult person you're ever going to lead is yourself. And so I would just say, when it comes to team, build it, starting churches with teams, stay humble, keep learning, and keep people in your life who will tell you the truth about you. Stay accountable and lean into guides and observers that God puts in your life and let them speak into your life, because you're always going to be accountable. So choose great people to be accountable to, so you can keep growing and you can overcome that challenge of you and be a part of a great team in starting a new church. I will stop there.
So good, Jeff. Some absolute gold there. And even already from some of the questions that are coming through, obviously have kind of sparked a whole bunch of thoughts and questions that people have got. I'm going to ask Catherine Jensen to take herself off mute if she can, and to ask the question that she's thrown in the chat.
Without reading it word for word, essentially it's the question around the fivefold APS gifts, apostle, prophet, evangelist,
Yes.
shepherd, teacher. And the more we talk about collaboration, I can't help but think about the necessity for the gifts to work together. Traditionally, we've got the teachers and the pastors in the appointed seats, and the apes are going ape, the apostles, prophets, and evangelists playing on the margins. And I think there's real potential here for a disciplining of egos and for the coming together of those gifts to work together. But maybe that's going to cause some of the pastors and teachers to feel a little bit displaced for a while. And I just wonder if you can comment on that. That's a big question.
No, it is. But I think you're hitting on something, Catherine. Like I would say we actually used a PES tool with our church planting candidates. I think it's a great lens to look through when you're developing your team around you. Which ones are missing, because we need all of them, right? We need all of those in this. And I think that's of the staying humble, understanding your gifts, what you bring to the team, having a place to use those gifts, but also having others on the team who bring the other gifts. You need that evangelist. You're starting a new church. You want to reach the one, right? You want to reach, you need that person who just wakes up every day and can't wait to get to the coffee shop, can't wait to go see their neighbor. They just want, but you need that apostle too, who's going, hey, we've got to start something new. And there's, this is going to take some work to start something new, and what that looks like and the structure that goes with that. I think, to your point, Catherine, I think that's where humility and understanding how much we need each other is really going to be key. Church planting is not a competition, right? It is really going to take collaboration among all of us that we can be the best of each other and bring out the best of each other. So I think, Catherine, I think that's the lens you need to look through when it comes to really building teams for church planting. Established churches too, for that matter. Yeah.
Sounds good, Jeff, and thanks for that, Catherine. Hey, we're going to throw to Christian Nobleza now. If you want to take yourself off mute and ask the question that you had for Jeff.
Yeah, so it just had a question around stewardship of resources, particularly around sort of the pioneering, experimentation, and all that kind of stuff. Like, where do you draw a line, or can you give us guidance on how to draw a line as to whether to stop, moving in a certain direction, as opposed to perhaps being faithful and just sticking to it? Because, eventually, if you circle around it long enough, hopefully the walls come tumbling down, and we move into the place we want to be. Can you give us any comment on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Christian. I think here's what I would say. There are leaders who tend to be constantly looking for, the silver bullet. And so, I've certainly spent time with leaders who they tried something and it didn't work in 2 weeks. So it's like, let's try something else. And it's not nearly enough time to know whether that actually was working or not. It takes longer than that to know whether it's working. At the same time, you can try something for months in and out, a year, and just not hitting anything. I think anything that you try, figuring out the best ways of number one, clarifying what does a win look like for us on this, and then measuring what you're doing. The best ways of being able to try things that you can see what impact it's having. So, is this working? Should we keep at it with this, or should we try something else in our context? I think a lot of times we're good at trying things and we're not great at measuring them, or even being able to put into words what would a win look like. If how would we know if this worked? Well, if it created this, okay, well then that's what we're looking for in that. And so I think it's not an easy thing to figure out, but I think it's really being intentional, laying out what success looks like, and then measuring to that, and then going, okay, is this a good use of our resources, or do we need to try something else?
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Can I just sneak in a follow-up? Is that okay, Charlie?
Yeah, go for it.
Just, when we talk about measurables and metrics and stuff like that, and sometimes, our church planting experiments have, quite defined, outcomes and goals and things that we know we're on the right track. But could you also say that there's maybe some metrics that aren't necessarily involved with the actual church planting exercise or the activity, where you've had a crack at something, and it hasn't worked for a variety of reasons, but the fact that you had a go, for instance, created culture change in the broader church that you're part of, or etc. The concrete example I use, and the guys on the call here with me is Caleb and I here in Canberra, experimenting with this sort of Catholic Costal, a Catholic and a Pentecostal kind of gathering on a Sunday evening with young adults and uni students we have in the city. And I wouldn't say that we've necessarily failed at that, but for instance, it's having spin-off effects onto our respective church communities, or at least I can say that on my half of the equation, where the innovation that we are pioneering with Caleb and his church community, for instance, is inspiring other parts of the Catholic Archdiocese here to, look at new areas of innovation as well. So can you comment on what we define as some metrics may actually give fruit to other metrics that we may not think about necessarily?
Right. Yeah, I think, especially when you think about culture building, there are certainly things you're doing that, maybe you can't measure as much, but you're seeing the fruits. So, I think at the end of the day, numbers aren't going to tell you everything. I mean, you could have 500 people come to church and think, oh man, we're killing it, but nobody's becoming like Jesus and nobody's discipling anybody else. Like, numbers don't tell you everything. And so I think you do have to hold loosely of like, what are we seeing? What are we experiencing? What do we think is having a good impact on culture? I do think there's some things that you can measure even with that. And I think regardless of what you're doing, it still comes back to, hey, if we're starting a church to reach the one in Luke 15, how many people are we reaching in this? How many people am I in a relationship with who aren't following Jesus? And then are they coming and are they sticking in this new body? And I think those are some places where some friends of mine talk about an engagement pathway, like how people connect and grow. I think it's measuring some of those things, like, are people moving along the engagement pathway? And to which at the end of the engagement pathway, they're disciples making disciples, and they're bringing other people into the top of the funnel who are getting connected to your church. So I think there's a lot of things that you can create that can create culture in that. But I think those are some of the things you always want to be looking at, because like, we could really start something cool, but if it's not reaching anybody, does it really matter at that point? It's like, what is the outcome at the end of the day? It's going to be still the primary metrics.
Very good. Well, I may conclude our Q&A moment there. If we could all just give a big Zoom round of applause to Jeff. So appreciate Jeff's time with us.
Thank you.
As he's in transit, we so appreciate the time that you've taken, Jeff, to be with us today.
Hey, thanks again for inviting me, Charlie. Thank each of you. I'm going to put my email. If anybody does have a question that they weren't able to ask, I'll put it in the chat. So it's right there. And this guest that you have coming up probably does not remember me, but Dave was a huge help with Stadia back during COVID. We had him take part in a thing called Digital Learning Community. So think the world of Dave, and he was a great friend for us and a lot of help. So excited about, and we're also huge fans of Orange and got lots of friends over there. So excited for him to be able to share with you guys. Thank you.
Awesome, Jeff. Well, Jeff has just busted the bubble on our surprise guest for this afternoon, but if you hadn't already seen him jump in the call, that's absolutely fine. We are joined for our last 10 minutes of our time together by Dave Adamson. Dave is also known as Aussie Dave. He is an online pastor. He is the director of Orange Australia, New Zealand. He has historically been involved in the US as well, particularly with North Point and Andy Stanley's ministry. And I've invited Dave along today, particularly, as I said at the beginning of our call, that we love on behalf of Exponential to be able to introduce other great Christian organizations that are wanting to help particularly church planters be more effective in what they are called to do. And so, Dave, it's such a pleasure to be able to jump on with us today.
Hey, man, it's good to see you guys. It's good to see some familiar faces as well. Jeff, it's good to see you, mate. Charlie specifically wanted me to talk about family ministries, but I just feel like I need to pick up on where Jeff left off there. That engagement pathway is such an important process for churches to figure out what that looks like at your church in your context specifically, because your context is going to be different in Canberra as it is to up here where I am on the Sunshine Coast, which is going to be different to, in Atlanta, where I was, on staff at North Point for a long time. At North Point, we had 4 key metrics that we tracked as far as engagement went, and we considered somebody fully engaged in our church if they were doing all 4 of these things. And those 4 things specifically were they in a group, in a small group, whatever you call small group, life group, whatever. So that would be engagement step 1. Engagement step 2 was, are they serving on a team? So are they serving in some capacity on a Sunday or during the week for the church? are they giving, so financially supporting the church? And then the fourth step was, are they, what we called it sharing, but essentially, are they inviting other people to come and come to church events or to join small groups and things like that? And those four things for us were somebody who was fully engaged if they did all four of those things. And we had that strategy so dialed in that we would track and monitor. If somebody was doing 3 out of the 4, they got a separate sort of email than somebody who was doing 2 out of the 4. And if the 2 out of the 4 were the 1 and 4, but not 1 and 3, they got a separate email again. So we had it all funneled through our church management system so that we were tracking those things that, Jeff was talking about specifically. So we could track where they were on their engagement pathway with the church, which for us was a huge part of the discipleship, right? Because if somebody's in a small group and they're giving to the church and they're serving the church and they're inviting their friends, then we've got some sort of indication that they're fully invested in the church. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. I don't know. That probably wasn't even helpful.
So probably good. I appreciate that, Dave.
Probably only Caleb and Jeff were with me on there. Yeah, thanks, Caleb. Right on time with the smiley face. So look, really quickly, I just wanted to. I know you've only got a couple of minutes, but I wanted to just quickly share with you guys just an exciting partnership that we've set up with Exponential. Just Charlie and I have been talking about this, mate, in like 9 months or something, and finally we've given birth to this process. Or at least it feels that long. For those of you that don't know, as Charlie said, my name is Dave Adamson. I was on staff at North Point for 7 years from 2013 to 2020 before I moved back at the end of 2020 to come back to Australia. And because my wife and I decided, why not make an international move as hard as possible in the midst of a global pandemic? We like to do things hard in our family. And previous to that, I was the online pastor at a church in New Jersey from 2008 to 2013. And previous to that, I was actually part of a church plant. Charlie, I don't even think I've told you this. I was part of a church plant for 9 years in the western suburbs of Melbourne. So I've been through a church that started with 5 people, 2 couples and a single woman, grew to about 150. And I did that for like 8 or 9 years. Then went to New Jersey, where I was part of a church that started with 2,500 people when I first landed there. They already had 2,500, and they moved to about 4,500 by the time I left to go to Atlanta, where I went to a church that in 2013 had 37,000 people. And then by the time I left was 42,000 people in attendance on a Sunday. So I've been through this full gamut of all of this. And one of the things that I've learned, though, through that process, and I've, if you follow me on social media, you would have seen that I've done this. I really firmly believe that family ministries is the growth engine of any church. That's my categoric statement. And so as pastors, as church leaders, I think it's really incumbent upon us to have a strategy in place for family ministries, whatever that looks like. The surveys were done in the US through Barna and a few other places that said that the average church, though, only has 40 hours a year with a kid or a student. So 40 hours a year, because that's how often they would attend, et cetera, et cetera. Because obviously not everybody attends every single week. Whereas the average family, the average parent has about, and when I say parent, single parent, nuclear parents, aunties, uncles, grandparents, anybody who's responsible for the care of a child or a student, they have a year about 3,000 hours of influence. And so I work now for an organization called Orange. That's part of what I do here in Australia. And Orange really is all about taking the light of the church and mixing it with the heart of the home to, so yellow light, red heart to make this thing of orange. And really what orange is, which kind of separates us from a lot of the other, kids curriculum stuff, student curriculum stuff that's out there, is we really believe that we are a church strategy company that help churches grow by partnering first and foremost with parents. Yes, we create curriculum, but first and foremost, we want to partner with parents and make that influence that they have, to exponentially increase that and scale that as much as possible. And so we create curriculum, essentially, is what we do. But here's the exciting part. You might have already heard of Orange or you might not, but if you got any questions, I can answer those. But over the past 9 months or so, been working with Charlie to try to figure out how can we best, my wife and I moved back to Australia because we have a heart for the church in Australia. Specifically, the thing that gets us up in the morning is how can we reach the unchurched people who live in our neighborhood, and how can we help church leaders like yourselves reach the unchurched people who live within driving distance of your building? And one of the ways we really feel that that's the best ways to do that is through resourcing parents, resourcing schools, resourcing church leaders to better connect and pass on faith to their kids. And so, as far as our connection with Exponential now goes, what I've been able to work out with Orange is that for every, Charlie, am I revealing all of this now? Do you want me to?
Yeah, please go for it.
So basically, for every church that has started in 2013 or will start from 2023 onwards, Orange is going to give the first year of Orange curriculum completely for free. That is everything from birth. We call it birth to college, but in Australia, it would be birth to university, right? So every curriculum piece that we have from that kids would go through and students would go through, including all of our media, including all of our training and onboarding, all of that for churches that kick off in 2023. We're going to give it completely free moving forward. And then for the second year, we're going to do it 50% off. And for the third year, we're going to do it 25% off, which is way more than what we've been able to offer any other church in Australia. But that's because we know that a church that's kicked off, you guys don't have much resources, and we want to try to help as much as we can. So yeah, that's what the partnership is going to be. It's going to require you zero investment in the first year, anything like that, but you'll get absolutely everything that Orange has to help you get started and hopefully kick you off as you start this whole new venture. So that's our big announcement, I guess. I wanted to see if there are any questions. Do you have any questions?
Any questions from the floor? They can also be answered after our call as well, but
come on, Caleb, give me something.
I think he's just excited.
I was holding back because we may or may not already be using it. But how do people get on it, Dave?
That was that Dorothy Dixer softball political question. If you go to thinkorange.com, that's the best way to do it. Also, look, Charlie, you and I didn't talk about this, but obviously, again, my passion is to help churches. So I not only want to help churches as far as offering family ministries resources. I also want to help churches as far as digital ministry goes as well. So if there's anything I can do to help you with your digital ministry, I'm all about that as well. So what I'm going to do is, I can't do it because Charlie won't let me share. I was going to give a QR code that would literally give you my phone number and my email address. There he goes. Look at that. And please, before I share this, y'all don't judge me by how many tabs I have open, okay? Because I know some of you will. Don't judge me by it. But if you all scan that QR code, that will literally take you to my email address. It will give you my phone number and any other ways that you need to contact me. And seriously, y'all, we really just want to, and I personally just really want to support you guys as any way that I can, whether that's with digital stuff, whether that's with online and how I can help there, or if it's with kids ministry, getting you onboarded. Orange is completely free. I really think it just makes sense for you all to start using it. But, obviously I'm biased as well. I'm not here to sell anything. I'm just here to give stuff away. So if I can be of any service, please let me know. Did everybody scan that? I'm going to assume everybody scanned that.
Fantastic. Well, guys,
everybody starts texting me to see if it was real. But it's real.
Well, I'm aware, folks, that our time has very quickly come to an end, but we are so thankful for Dave, so thankful for Orange. We join with exactly what the sentiment that Dave shared. We want to do all we can to help churches be planted that reach their communities for the cause of Jesus Christ. And so that's the very heartbeat of Exponential as well. So we are so thankful that you've been able to make the time to join us for our second quarter Church Planters Collective. Feel free to spread the word. We have another gathering happening this evening for those church planters that are bivocational or are planting micro churches. We are wanting to encourage all sorts of church planting. So please spread the word for those who would like to jump on either this evening or next quarter when we gather together. But we so appreciate the time that you guys have taken to invest in yourself and connect with one another. So bless you heaps, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.